Hello humans, here we are again, Unit 3, topic number 4 of Let's Learn Python here on Code with Connor. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about try and except statements, and we'll touch a little bit on global variables and returning values from functions, and how that affects the structure of our programs. Before we do any of that, we got to go back and look at the challenge from the last lesson. In the last lesson, we rewrote the age conditional program from earlier on in the course using functions that return values. So here we are. I define some functions. Alcan takes an A. If A is greater than or equal to 19, return true, else return false. I defined a function called vote. Takes A. If A is greater than or equal to 18, return true, otherwise false. Drive, same for 16. Then in my base code, outside of my function blocks, I take age as an int from the user, and then I do if alcan age, that calls the function alcan with the variable age, and that function returns true or false, which then decides whether or not the code inside runs. If it returns true, then it's going to print the print statement. If it returns false, it's not. If vote age, if drive age, and those are my print statements. And that's all we did for the challenge for the last lesson. And best part, there's no challenge this lesson, just some code, and you got to listen to me talk for a little bit, and then you get to move on to the unit project because you're going to be done another unit. It's pretty dope. All right, here we are. Unit 3, topic 4. Let's look at this little blip of code right here. I have a while true statement. I have a try. What's a try? Interesting. It's yellow. Must be a reserved thing. It is. And then I have this except. With this value error, let's ditch that. Let's just put except for now. Try, except, user val equals int input, enter a number. Print, your number is str user val. So ask them for a number, print the number, and then break out of the loop. Print, an exception has occurred, try again, and then continue the loop. So restart it. Interesting. What is this going to do? Let's run it and see. Run it, enter a number, 5. All right, that's all it did. My number is 5. Cool. Negative 25. All right. Wait, an exception occurred. Try again. Adam. No, don't like that either. Code with Connor. No. Like, share, subscribe. No, don't like that. 5? It likes that. It quit. So it's waiting for me to enter a number. Remember before this, anytime we asked the user for an integer, we were stuck expecting the user to put in an integer. And if they didn't, it crashed our whole program. Could you imagine if every time you were filling out a form on a website or you were playing a game and you made a mistake, the whole program crashed? That would probably not be the best case scenario. So the nice thing about try and except statements is they allow us as coders to anticipate the potential mistakes that users are going to make and be prepared for those mistakes so that the user doesn't have a negative experience. So I'm going to try to do this thing that might pose a problem. If it poses a problem, instead of crashing the program, it's going to jump down and it's going to run what's in the except statement instead. Because it tried what's in the try, but it failed. So it'll run down and do the except. Now you can put more specific excepts in. So just for fun, let's just ditch that and go back to a program where all we do is get the integer and print it. Okay? Super simple program. And I run that, and let's enter A, and I get my error. Now it says right on there what type of error it is. It is a value error, capital V, capital E. So now that I know the type of error that I'm dealing with, I can come to my code, and I can actually change my except statement to have that specific error. So it's not just watching for any error, it's watching specifically for a value. And you can chain those except statements. So you can have an except statement for a value error and then an except statement for a different kind of error and except. So a lot of times you'll have a try around a pretty large block of code that's going to try to do a lot of things. So main program loops are often wrapped in a try statement and then multiple except statements for all the different types of errors that might occur during main program execution. Okay, so that's a typical structure for this try and except, is that your main program loop is probably going to be wrapped in a try if it involves the potential for error, and then multiple except statements will be chained immediately after it to deal with all the possible exceptions that might come from your code. Now, you might still need small little try and excepts for individual circumstances, but a lot of times coders will have these big blanket try and excepts as well over main program loops. Okay, now we're going to jump down and we're going to talk a little bit about global variables. So variables are really interesting because they have something called scope. And what that means is that a variable can only kind of see within its block of code or deeper. It can't really see back, particularly when it comes to manipulating variables. There's a little bit of this in Python where it can see, but it can't change something that's behind it. And as soon as you want to change something that's behind it in the block of code, then you have to start dealing with global variables. So we're going to go through a little example program here just to kind of explain this a little bit. So we have our main code, which is our unindented code that kind of is our first line of execution. Then we have our function code, so that's code inside of a function block. And then we have this scope where we can't really look backwards, especially when it comes to modifying values. So if we're inside of a function and there's a variable outside of the function, we can't change that variable from inside the function. We can create a new local copy with the exact same name, but it's not going to modify it for other parts of the program. So when we want to have these kind of overarching variables that are accessible and modifiable from inside of functions, we have to start dealing with global variables. So I'm going to have 3 variables. I have a variable called hasSword, which is true. I have a variable called hasKey, which is false. And I have a variable called name, which I currently have set to Adam. Okay? These are in my main execution block. Then I have a function called greeting. In this function, I'm going to print hello name, and that name is going to read backwards to this name variable. If you are a brave and noble warrior. Okay? So this is trying to see backwards from a function back to main execution. This is okay in Python. In some languages, not so much. In Python, we're here and it can see backwards, and that's great. It can't modify name right now the way the code is currently written, but it can see it because it knows that it exists outside of the code. Then I have if hasSword is true, print I see you have the sword of Anor-Mahon. I made that up. I don't know what it is. And then if hasKey is false, then print you may not proceed further without the key, and then prompt the user for a value. So choice is an input. Would you like to pick up the key? Yes or no? If their choice is yes. And this is where it gets interesting. This is me trying to modify the value of hasKey. But hasKey is outside here. It's outside of my function. So my function is trying to look back and modify a value behind it. And it can't really do that because it doesn't have global scope on that variable. And then I have choice no, but Leary, are we fair enough? That's not really relevant. And then outside my code, I'm going to call greeting twice. Okay, just to give me a chance to pick up the key or not pick up the key. So right now, hasSword is true, hasKey is false, but this function has no global access to these variables, which means it can see them, but it cannot modify them. Okay, so if I wanted to be able to modify them, this is what I do. At the top of my function, I'm going to do global, which is a keyword, and then I'm going to put the name of a variable that I want to be able to access. And you can string these together using a comma. So comma space and then the next one. So all I'm saying here is when this function greeting sees hasSword, it knows I am not storing my own hasSword. I am referencing the one outside of my function block, and anything I do to it has to modify that reference. So it has to modify that block of memory where the main variable is stored, where the global variable is stored. So when I do this modification here and I do hasKey equals true, that's not going to modify some local version inside of my function. That's going to modify the actual memory location for the global variable that's outside of my function block. So that's important when we're trying to have these kind of tracking variables within our program that need to be visible and manipulatable from within functions. So let's run this code and kind of see how it runs. And it's a bit clunky, but it prints, hello Adam, so it read name. You are a brave and noble warrior. Why, thank you. I see you have the sword of Anor-Mahon. Okay, so it recognizes that the sword variable is true. You may not proceed any further without the key. Would you like to pick up the key? Yes. Okay, and then it's going to run my greeting function again because I have it in there twice. So now it says, hello Adam, you are a brave and noble warrior. I see you have the sword of Enor Mahan, but it doesn't ask about the key. And the reason it's not asking about the key is because it only asks about the key if hasKey is false. And I answered yes the first time around, would change the value to true. So it's recognizing that. And any other function that we write would also recognize that change. So that's the important thing about changing globals, is that multiple functions might be looking at the same global variable to decide whether or not to run a block of code. And only one function might have the power to modify that variable, but all of them are pointing at the same thing. So this global variable structure allows you to modify and read these variables that are visible to all of your function blocks. And that's what's so cool about the way the global variable stuff works. And you can start to see like, oh, well, why would I bother with returning things from functions if I'm just going to use global variables? Well, maybe you won't. Maybe you'll do a mix of globals and returns. Maybe you'll hate returns and you'll use mostly globals. Maybe you'll use mostly returns and you hate globals. And there are deeper reasons why you would want to use one versus the other. But as an introductory programmer, that's part of you developing your style. Is this style of call and response from functions, or is it a call that's more global variable-y? And kind of figuring out how that's going to work is really dependent on the code base you're working in and your own style, until you get to a higher level and you actually start thinking about processing and memory and all these other things where it might be relevant to use one over the other. So that's it. There's no challenge. So we're done with Unit 3, Topic 4. And actually, we're done with Unit 3 completely except for the project. So all you got to do, like, share, subscribe, come back in the next video, and we'll go over the project for Unit number 3. If you're still here at this point, you're doing awesome. You're doing good things for yourself, learning a new skill. That's wicked. That's more than most people are doing with their life. I mean, you could sit and watch Netflix until you find the end, but I don't think there is an end. Or, you could learn some cool skills. So thanks for being here. I appreciate you. You're awesome. We'll see you back here real soon.